Well, good morning and benvenuto to Roma. I know that a lot of the class today is watching this on recording. So I am speaking not only to you, Mike, and to you, Lois, in the background, but also to those who will be watching this on recording. So welcome. This is an all-new class for the Vero Beach Museum of Art. And I'm happy to see Tom joining us as well. And Susan, okay, good. Our numbers are growing for our adventure in Rome.
Morning, Chris. School
Welcome,
starts again.
Yes, good to see you too.
I'm going to put you on.
And welcome, Susan.
I'm traveling, so I'm sort of going back and forth, but I'll cover it all. Don't worry.
Okay, so Tom, you are traveling both virtually and literally. Huh?
Literally and virtually, mostly literally.
A man for all seasons.
Great trip through Canada and Maine and whatever else. And now on the way to Pennsylvania and then back
Sounds
to Florida.
exciting.
Back to
Well,
Florida.
this is the time of year for that, for sure.
got
This
it.
is the time of year for Canada and Maine.
Well, it's the time of year to just at least travel finally.
Yeah, yes, yeah, that's nice. And good morning, Lois. Welcome. So, as I said, benvenuto to Roma. Welcome to our all-new course about the Eternal City. This is a brand new course from the Vero Beach Museum of Art, and it's our first course to be all about a single city. With Rome, we'll have no lack of material. So this is exciting for me, and I hope for all of you as well. Our first course that is focused on a single city, and Rome is aptly named the Eternal City, at least from the standpoint of the history of human civilization. We will be exploring Rome from antiquity through the Renaissance and the Baroque, very colorful and flamboyant eras. And then we will dip briefly into the neoclassical age as well. But our key periods for Rome are antiquity, classical times, and then the Renaissance, and finally the Baroque. With Renaissance Rome, of course, we'll be looking at Michelangelo's masterpieces on the Sistine Chapel ceiling. We will be looking at other works by Michelangelo, as well as Raphael and other old masters. And then with the Baroque age, we have Bernini, we have Caravaggio, very swashbuckling characters and flamboyant artists. So there is much to explore, and our course is set up chronologically. So we begin with ancient times, and we begin with actually not only the world of the Caesars, but the world before them, the rise of the Roman Republic. A famous historian said that there are the two greatest questions, the two greatest problems in world history are how to account for the fall of Rome and how to account for its rise. We often talk about the fall of Rome and the historical parallels that we might see, but the rise of Rome is amazing in its own right. This was an obscure city on the Italian peninsula that rose to command a world empire. So that's what we'll be looking at during our first day, and maybe our first couple of days. We'll be beginning today with the Roman Republic. So that will allow us to chart the origins of Rome and the course from a single city on its own, dominated in fact by the Etruscans, to then establishing its independence and then becoming a world empire. And then during the next 2 weeks, at least, we will be exploring Imperial Rome and, as is often said, the grandeur that was Rome. So with that, I will begin screen sharing. And I have as an opening image for you both. Let me just go into slideshow mode. I have actually as an opening image, two images, this one and this one, because this is a painting that needs decoding. This is an 18th century painting by the Grand Tour artist Panini. And Panini is a Grand Tour artist. This is an idea we've explored in some of the other museum classes. What does Grand Tour artist suggest to you? What kind of a market is Panini working, and what is his subject matter usually going to be?
His market is the travelers to Rome.
Yes, exactly. His market is the travelers coming to Rome, and his subject matter, therefore, is going to be iconic scenes of Rome. What better souvenir to take home from your visit to a great city than a painting of that city, especially before the age of photography? So the Grand Tour travelers who visited Rome in the 18th century, what better memento for them than a painting of Rome by Panini? Panini became the preeminent Grand Tour artist for Rome, just as Canaletto was the preeminent Grand Tour artist for Venice. Usually, Panini is showing us a single scene in Rome, you know, the Pantheon, the Trevi Fountain. In this case, he is showing us a composite, and that makes this his masterpiece, along with a complementary painting that we'll be looking at later, where he shows views of, quote, modern Rome, that is modern for the 18th century. With these paintings, Panini is giving us what kind of a scene? What kind of a scene do you think he's setting up here in order to bring together all these different views of Rome?
I think that there's the church effect
Yeah.
with the arches and the niches and so forth. So that's very indicative of Rome.
Yes, indeed. There is a sense here of the grand architecture that we would fittingly associate with the churches and cathedrals of Rome. And it's interesting that Panini uses this kind of grand and even religious, even reverent architecture for the theme of a gallery. This is the idea of a painting within a painting, actually a number of paintings within this painting. Panini's painting is showing us a gallery of paintings of Rome. So this is an idea that is philosophically very interesting to artists through the ages, the painting within a painting. It comes up in a lot of the courses because it's so intriguing to artists. And I always use, by way of analogy, Shakespeare does the same thing when he gives us a play within a play. In many of Shakespeare's plays, the characters will watch a play, and there's a play within a play. It's rather existential. Well, the equivalent in art is a painting within a painting. In this case, Panini really goes over the top. This is characteristically Roman flamboyance, because this is not just a painting within a painting. This is a whole gallery of paintings within a painting. So it makes for a very imaginative and unforgettable view of all of these different scenes of Rome within a single image. Identifiably, for example, you can see the Colosseum just to the right of the of the corridor. Now, the code, the key, is here. And there's a lot to this, so I will send, along with the itinerary, I will send a link to this for Ellen to send to all of you. But this is the key to the map, so to speak, showing us all of the different views and artifacts, sculptures as well, that Panini includes in this painting. So what Panini is giving us here is a spectacular and also very intricate glimpse of ancient Rome through paintings of classical monuments and buildings, great architecture, and also through the use of classical sculpture. Therefore, I thought this would be the perfect introduction to this course, the first part of our course being about ancient Rome. Here, Panini, from the perspective of an 18th century painter, gives us a whirlwind tour in a single image through the world of ancient Rome.
Hmm.
I wanted to also include early on a map showing the 7 hills of Rome. We all know this expression, the 7 hills of Rome, the city built on 7 hills. Well, here they are. So you have the Quirinal Hill, Viminal Hill, Esquiline Hill, Capitoline Hill, and Palatine Hill. And there we have English cognates, right? As well as Celian Hill and Aventine Hill. And you can see also on this map where some of the key sites of ancient Rome are marked. The Colosseum, the Circus Maximus, they're marked as far as their location. In terms of cognates, you have Capitoline, right? What word do we get in English from Capitoline Hill? Capital. And Palatine, what English word do we get from Palatine Hill? And I'll give you a clue, that was where the emperors lived.
Oh,
So the English word it gives us?
palace.
Yes, palace. That's where the word palace comes from. The emperors of Rome lived on the Palatine Hill. And at first, with Emperor Augustus, as we'll see, he did not even live in a palace, really. He lived in a nice villa. You know, Augustus had a very comfortable home, but he was deliberately modest in a sense. He kept a low profile because he knew what happened to Julius Caesar, his predecessor. So he wanted to avoid a similar fate. And therefore, he kept a relatively modest profile. And you really would not call his home a palace. It was simply a nice, comfortable Roman villa. But it was on Palatine Hill, and he was emperor. And then it was followed, of course, by much more luxurious buildings as the emperors became more decadent. So thus, our word palace. You'll also notice the Tiber River. Rome is on the Tiber River. We will see some of the sites that are near the Tiber. At the same time, Rome has a port city at the mouth of the Tiber, a port known as Ostia. Today, it's often called Ostia Antica, ancient Ostia. And we'll be looking at some of those ruins as well, even though they're not directly within the city of Rome. They're not far. It's a day trip from Rome today. And Ostia was important to the ancient city of Rome because the Tiber was not all that navigable, certainly not for a ship, a seafaring ship. So Ostia the port at the mouth of the Tiber was an important point through which supplies would funnel to Rome, and also, well, both supplies and luxury goods as well. So Ostia is an important port city. So this is the famous Etruscan she-wolf, and also sometimes called the Capitoline she-wolf after Capitoline Hill. And I sometimes like to pair this with a photo showing same species, a European wolf, with more traditional cubs, as opposed to the human babies that the Etruscan she-wolf is famously nursing. So this relates to the legend of the founding of Rome. The two babies are Romulus and Remus, and they have been abandoned in the forest by a corrupt uncle who is trying to usurp the throne. So they're the rightful heirs, abandoned in an attempt to get rid of them, but they are found by a she-wolf who has lost her own cubs. And the maternal instinct prompts her to adopt these strange-looking hairless cubs as her own. So you see here the ancient Roman sculpture of the she-wolf, and it's very evident from the legend and obviously from the portrayal that the wolf was meant to be nursing baby Romulus and Remus. The actual figures of baby Romulus and Remus were lost. So these are reproductions that were made, but now these reproductions are historic works of art in their own right, because they date from the late Renaissance. They date from the Renaissance, perhaps early Baroque. I'd have to double check the precise date, but they are centuries old now themselves. I also like to compare this. I have a bit of a family heirloom that I can show you. And I can kind of illustrate some aspects of history with this, because this is a statuette of the Etruscan she-wolf that my great-grandmother got when she was on a trip to Rome. She was from southern Italy, the village of Calitri, little village of Calitri in the Apennine Mountains of southern Italy. The closest big city was Naples, and I don't think that she had ever been to Rome before she left Italy. But then eventually, after she and my great-grandfather had emigrated, they were living in New York for decades, they eventually went back by ocean liner for a visit back to Italy. And along with spending, of course, most of their time in Calitri and seeing the family again, they also visited Rome. At that point, I've got a picture of them near the Spanish Steps. And that was when she got this statuette.
Oh, no.
And it's linguistically interesting too, because I can remember when I was a boy, I can remember her telling me the story of Romulus and Remus, using this as a prop, as a visual aid. And she was telling me the story in broken English. Her first language was the Colatron dialect, not even Italian. Italian is Tuscan, really. The mainstream Italian is the language of Tuscany. Her first language was the village dialect. So this story was basically coming to me. I realize now, I didn't know it at the time, but I realize now this story was coming to me from Latin through Colatron dialect into English. So that's interesting. And then another thing that is kind of interesting in terms of the different generational reactions and the different backgrounds is that my great-grandmother, who was telling me the story, she would tell the story in a very matter-of-fact kind of way. Whereas my grandmother, who was born and grew up in the New York City area, she would look at this and she was rather appalled by it. The idea of the human babies nursing from a wolf. She was very upset about the hygiene here, or lack thereof. Whereas to my great grandmother, she was simply passing this down very matter of factly as an ancient traditional story. Now, when we look at the rise of Rome, early Roman portraits from the era of the Republic, are a tremendous artistic resource and a historical resource. They give us such a feel for the culture and the values of the time, as well as the artistic style and the artistic values. So, give you a little background on the establishment of the Roman Republic. When you go back very early in Roman history, you'll notice the term here, Etruscan she-wolf. You find very early on that Rome is subject to the Etruscans. And the Etruscans are based in northern Italy, in Tuscany, of course. In fact, the name of the province Tuscany comes from Etruscan. Tuscany was the land of the Etruscans. And the Etruscans were at their peak well before Rome. The Etruscans were at their peak when Rome was, just one city on the Italian peninsula. So the Etruscans at one point ruled Rome. There were Etruscan kings ruling over Rome. Eventually, there was a Roman uprising. The last of the Etruscan kings was driven out of the city. And then during the subsequent generations, the tides turned and Rome obviously ends up dominating the Italian peninsula, including Tuscany. When the Romans first rose up against the Etruscans, they did not replace the Etruscan king with a Roman emperor or a Roman king. At that time, they established a republic as a system of government. So you have the origins of the Roman Senate. And then along with the Senate, there was a system of checks and balances in addition to that, wherein they had a title called consul. The consul was like the executive branch, the head of state, but there were always two consuls at once. So it was kind of like a co-presidency. So there was no legislative branch, so to speak, but there was a deliberately divided executive branch. So it was an idea of checks and balances that it's not coincidental that it sounds familiar in terms of American history. The generation of George Washington, the founding fathers, they were very classically educated, and they were deliberately looking at the history of the Roman Republic in setting up their own experiments in government. But now, if you take a look at this portrait, and I've got a couple of others from the era to show you, what do you make of this in terms of character, expression, personality?
Fairly stern looking.
Yes, yes. In case you couldn't hear, very stern look was the comment there. And that is indeed the case. And it's something that we see, I'll come back to this one, but it's something that we see quite widely in the portraits of the age of the Republic. Here too, you see a very stern expression. Something else that you might notice, and I think it's very apparent with this profile view. So this is the first one we looked at, this portrait of a patrician, possibly Cato the Elder. I'll get to who he is in a minute. But if you look at the profile view, what else might be apparent about his character and about how he's portrayed? Lois, you'll need to unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can.
I get the same impression, don't mess with me.
Yes, yes. Don't mess with me. That's a good phrase. In fact, the expression a line in the sand, or drawing a line in the sand, that comes from the Roman Republic. There was a Roman statesman who was sent to Egypt, and he was offering terms to the ruler of Egypt. This is as Rome was expanding its power. This Roman statesman was offering terms to the Egyptian ruler, and the Egyptian ruler wanted time to think about it. The Roman literally took out his sword and drew a line in the sand around the Egyptian and told him, give me an answer before you step across that line. And that was the original line in the sand. So that's from this man's age, his culture, the Roman Republic. Do you think that he's trying to look young?
No.
Yeah, definitely not, right? It's actually almost like every line on his face has been almost lovingly portrayed. There is a great sense of detail here, and that sense of detail is used to show us a man of age and experience. For the Romans of the Republic, age means experience, and it often means endurance. And that's the case here. You know, he has a weather-beaten look that suggests that he has weathered the storms of life. Perhaps he was a warrior when he was younger. In any event, you know, he's certainly strong and confident person, but confident not in an over-the-top arrogant kind of way. There is a sense of strength about him. These portraits can be described in a single word if we wanted to, because it's the word for the philosophy of that era, and that word is Stoic. These are literally and figuratively Stoic portraits. The Stoic philosophy was very popular while Rome was on the rise, and Stoic philosophy emphasized courage, honor, beauty. A great kind of modern expression of Stoic philosophy is keep calm and carry on, from Britain during World War II. Keep calm and carry on. And you still see it happily as a slogan today. And that is a great expression of Stoic philosophy. Keep calm and carry on.
Chris, a word that comes to me too is determination.
Yes. Yes, Lois, determination is another great Stoic value. Again, I mentioned, you know, Britain during World War II. Think of a great speech by Sir Winston Churchill. You know, Churchill was a very Stoic figure in the modern age.
Chris, good morning.
Good
I have a
morning,
quick
Julie.
question about why or how did the Romans conquer the Etruscans? The Etruscans were very established. I mean, do we know, did they set out to did they put their sights on that area and say, we're going to go get them? Or was it weapons, or was it military strategy? What turned it around?
That's a great question, Julie. As far as setting their sights on them, yes, I think they did, because the Etruscans had been dominant over Rome. Since they had Rome in subjection at one point. I mean, think how that's going to go for Roman pride. The Romans eventually rose up against the Etruscan kings, And there would have been an enmity from that point on. For the Romans to conquer the Etruscans, it would have seemed like from the Roman standpoint, almost like a natural enmity. Now, this is all somewhat ironic in itself because, and the dynamic between the Romans and the Etruscans sets the stage for a lot of Roman history, arguably. The Romans see the Etruscans as an enemy, but they also see them as an honorable enemy, as a worthy opponent. Hey, the Etruscans were strong enough to have conquered us at one point and to set up kings over us, have Rome itself in subjection. So they're viewed as very much a worthy opponent. So the Romans see the conquest of Tuscany as like a duel, a duel with a worthy opponent. So it was a natural goal for them to have, but then it was also, tempered by this sense of respect. Now, from there, when you think about this dynamic of the Romans and the Etruscans seeing each other as worthy opponents, when the Romans win, they are not at all interested in wiping out the Etruscans. They want the Etruscan strength to become part of their own strength. So the Romans assimilate the Etruscans. Etruscans are gradually welcomed in to Roman society. There is a process established where over time, the Etruscans are given more and more rights in Roman society. And then eventually we have a famous sculpture known as the Orator, where we see a statesman or politician addressing a crowd, and the inscription indicates that he is Etruscan. But it's a Roman sculpture, he's addressing a Roman crowd, so it's evidence of Etruscans being accepted into Roman society, eventually even in leadership roles. That process of assimilation, that greatly strengthened Rome in its early days, and then throughout the peak of the empire. Etruscan strength was added to Roman strength. Instead of trying to wipe them out, once they conquered them, they assimilated them, they made them part of Roman society, they rewarded them for being part of Roman society. Thus, Etruscan strength was added to Roman strength. And together, the Mediterranean lay before them. That idea of assimilation would continue throughout, at least, up through the peak of Roman civilization. And it's one of the major reasons that the Roman Empire got as big as it did and lasted as long as it did. When the Romans conquered a territory, they were, by rewarding people who went along with them, by assimilating the people into Roman culture, they added strength to their empire instead of having to continually put down uprisings behind them as they went farther along. So that idea of assimilation, which the Etruscans are a very early example of that. And it's a strategy that would go on to be essential to the size and the long-lasting nature of the Roman Empire.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Not to mention, initially, I guess they wanted their agriculture there.
Yes, indeed.
Would add strength, and their art.
Yes, their agriculture, their art, their precious metals as well. It's not so much the case in Tuscany now because they're depleted. But in ancient times, Etruscan territory also was a good source of precious metals.
Right. Thank you.
Yes.
Chris, I had read somewhere about the influence, or you said Washington, and
Yeah.
others used the Roman Republic as a model. And they referred to a story about the days of the Revolutionary War soldiers, and they'd be sitting around a campfire freezing, and here are these kind of quote unquote uneducated soldiers. And if you walk by and said, let's talk about Cato, they could and would.
Yes.
I guess there was a playwright in the 18th century that did this widely read play about Cato. It's pretty fascinating.
Yes, and that was actually George Washington's favorite play.
Huh. Well, and you know, Cato was a tough guy. I mean,
He
committed
was, yeah, let's
suicide.
go back to the image. This may be a portrait of Cato. Sorry, go on, Tom. I just wanted to
I'm just
set this
saying,
up.
he just committed suicide. And, you know, he did a series of things. He wouldn't succumb to Caesar, and Caesar forgave all of his enemies except Cato. It's really
Mhm.
interesting, you know, tough history.
Yes, yes, he fell on his sword, so to speak. I don't recall if that was literal or figurative, but yes, he was, you know, one of these ones who he was going to be executed, and he was given the mercy, if that's the word, to do it himself instead. This was an aspect of Roman culture, as you said, tough history, and for a Roman warrior, that was seen as seen as something that was acceptable. That, you know, someone who was faced with execution could fall on his sword, or sometimes it was, you know, done in the bathtub, like. But there was that was a custom of Roman culture among those who were facing execution. And another interesting story about Cato is, you know, his repeated proclamation that Carthage must be destroyed. He was one who was trying to rally the Romans against an old enemy that he believed was still dangerous. And this was after the first two wars against Carthage. Carthage had then rebuilt, and Cato was convinced that, you know, if they kept rebuilding, they would eventually come at Rome again. So he got into the habit of, whenever he gave a speech in the Senate, no matter what the speech was about, his closing line would be, also, Carthage must be destroyed. And then his masterstroke was when he brought in a bough of fresh figs, fruit and leaves, into the Senate, and announced that they had been picked at Carthage that week. Now, it's possible, if it was a fast ship and fair winds, it's also very likely that the figs came from Cato's own estate. But it was a very effective bit of flair, theatrics, for the Senate in convincing them that Carthage was rising again and would prove to be a danger. So Cato did succeed in rallying them to strike against Carthage. Carthage, of course, was Rome's great rival during the days of the Republic, in the city of Carthage in North Africa. So there was warfare through the Mediterranean world, as Rome and Carthage were vying for a Mediterranean empire. Oh, another great quote from Cato. He once said, "I would rather people ask why there are no statues of me than ask why there are." Now, in this case, this may be a portrait of him, but he was apparently averse to having statues of himself put up in the city of Rome, as was often the case with public figures in classical times. Cato was averse to that, and that was the reason he gave. I'd rather people ask why there are no statues of me than ask why there are statues of me. This is another example of this Republic era Stoic portraiture. And when you think about this along with this next image, brings us to some key elements in Roman art itself, the techniques that are being developed early on in Roman art. The purpose of these portraits is to show the Stoic values of the people being portrayed. But in order to do that, you need this high level of detail. So along with the Stoic values, you also have the emphasis on realism in the arts, especially in portraiture. There's an interesting distinction in this respect, well, a connection and a distinction with Greek art. The importance of realism in art is Greco-Roman. We see that as a goal in both Greek art and Roman art, and it's called mimesis, as in mimicry, holding up a mirror to nature. With Roman art, you also see that they kind of zoom in on portraiture, on the face, as opposed to the Greeks, who usually use portraits of the whole body, or sculptures of the human figure. So there's a connection, but also a distinction. Both the Greeks and the Romans want their art to be as realistic as possible, but the Romans have this shift towards zooming in on the face, the emphasis on facial portraiture instead of the body as a whole. To the Greeks, man is the measure of all things. To the Romans, the eyes and the face are the windows to the soul. The Romans believe, as I think we do, that it's the face that really shows individuality and character. So Roman portraiture is especially good at the face, the individuality of the human face. Now, they are interested in realism with whatever they're doing in art. So this is an example of a piece that shows more of the Greek influence. It's a whole body figure, and it places emphasis on the drapery of the clothing. So, of course, the Greeks were very good at that, especially the Athenian sculpture, the Athenian sculptor Phidias. Phidias of Athens became so known for this skill that any effective use of drapery in sculpture is called Phidian drapery after him. You know you've made it in art history when your name is turned into an adjective. So this is Phidian drapery, even though it's from well after the time period of Phidias himself. His influence and Greek influence in general is definitely felt in Roman art. We often and rightly speak of the Greco-Roman world. So this is an example of the Greek influence in early Roman sculpture. In fact, even the instrument here is lost, as obviously is the head, but the instrument has been identified, suggested that it was a kithara, a Greek stringed instrument. And the sculptor has a Greek name, in fact, or uses one. Zeuxis made it, interestingly, is the literal translation of his signature inscription. And Zeuxis may well have actually been a Greek sculptor working in Rome, or he may have been a Roman sculptor, influenced by Greek art and using a Greek nom de plume, would add a certain exotic flair in Rome of the 1st century BCE. So Zeuxis may have been either a Greek or a Roman. He could actually have been a Greek artist, or he may have been a Roman sculptor who wanted to suggest that he was Greek and convey a sense of the exotic. So having looked at some early Roman sculptural pieces, let's take a look at Roman painting. This is kind of a classic example from one of the Vesuvian cities. The majority of Roman paintings, ancient Roman paintings that have survived are thanks to the eruption of Mount Vesuvius and the preservation from the ash. Vesuvius destroys, but also preserves Pompeii and several other cities. However, I was in researching this course, able to find some examples from Rome itself as well. So this is a scene from Homer's Odyssey that is from an ancient Roman villa, Roman both in the cultural sense and in the sense of the city of Rome itself. It's on a street that is today known as La Via Graziosa. And what do you make of this scene? How might you describe this? Genre, style? Do the people look like they're standing still? Looks like one of them is about to climb the tree, right? Others seem to be wading into the water. You have a lot of activity in this scene. In fact, we can definitely describe it as an action scene. This is an action scene.
Are they under the influence of something? I'm confused. I
Oh,
don't know
okay,
my
yeah. We're
Odyssey
looking
very well.
Yeah, we're looking at a fragment of it here. Plus there is some fading. But it's believed that this is a scene of people who are trying to attack a ship. So these are people on shore who are, you can see, it looks like, if you look at the figure, I'll zoom in a little here. This bearded figure looks like he might be directing people to hurl missiles, maybe getting ready to throw a spear himself. If you look at his other hand, the person who's climbing the tree might be doing so in order to gain a vantage point to throw something at the ship. There's a scene in the Odyssey that this is identified with, where Odysseus, Ulysses and his men have sailed into a new harbor, and then they quickly have to sail away because the natives are hostile, and their ship is soon under attack by people who are on the shore. The attackers, they're referred to as the Laestrygonians. They do not have ships themselves, which is a good thing for Ulysses, but they're trying to attack his ship from the shore. So that's the scene that this is identified with. Since it is fragmentary, I'm not saying that identification is definite, but it does seem reasonable given what's going on and given the popularity of the Odyssey. Now, an interesting thing about the idea of this kind of an action scene, and in fact, going right along with that question, is this well, there's an expression with classical literature, in media res. A classical epic, including the Odyssey, is described as beginning in media res, that is, in the middle of the action. Sorry, one moment. Okay, so it's described as beginning in media res, in the middle of the action. That is, the Odyssey does not start at the beginning. It's more like, well, it's a technique you see in movies and on television sometimes today, where we might begin with an exciting scene, maybe in the teaser. And then when the main part of the episode starts, you'll see words on the screen 2 days earlier or something like that. And we're going back to an earlier point in time to see how we got to that exciting scene. Well, that's actually a classical technique. That's what Homer does in the Odyssey. And it's called in media res. So when you
And
think
James
about,
Bond.
yes, you see this, with James Bond. You see this all the time in action films and adventure TV shows. And it goes back to Greek and Roman literature. So it kind of makes sense when you think about translating that style, that exciting style of writing, into a painting. In this kind of action scene that we have here, it makes sense. It fits with the style of the Odyssey itself. There's another really interesting and valuable artistic technique here. With the goal of mimesis in classical art, that's not only applied to humans, they're interested in the human form, and the Romans are very interested in their portraiture, they're very interested in the human face. But the principle of mimesis applies to any subject in a work of art. So for a scene like this, besides wanting the human figures to be recognizably human, what else might the artist be thinking about in terms of realism, in terms of mimesis for this scene? And I'll give you a clue. The haziness here is not just because of age and decay. There is some decay here, but the sense of haziness in the scene was also on purpose. If I zoom in a little towards the backdrop, what do you think the weather's like today?
Foggy?
Yes, exactly, Michael. It's foggy. The artist is realistically and believably conveying fog, mist, clouds. This is an ancient example of atmospheric perspective. It's one of those techniques that in Western art history was invented in the ancient Greco-Roman world, mostly lost during the Middle Ages, and then reinvented during the Renaissance. Renaissance means rebirth or reawakening. As we'll see when we get to the Renaissance in Rome, that age was about the reawakening of interest in the classical world and in classical artistic techniques that would make paintings and sculpture more realistic, the rebirth of mimesis. So when Masaccio in Florence during the Italian Renaissance, when he reinvents atmospheric perspective, it is a reinvention. This painting, among others, is proof that the ancient Romans had atmospheric perspective in their paintings. Masaccio and the other great Renaissance masters were reinventing or rediscovering it. This is another view from that scene, and this makes it actually clearer what is going on in terms of the attack from shore on ships. Now, I mentioned the identification not being, I was not saying the identification is definite. There are multiple ships here which raises some questions in terms of where or how this would fit into the Odyssey. You know, Ulysses is a great captain, but he's lucky when he has one ship. Sometimes it's falling apart underneath him. There seems to be kind of a flotilla here. So perhaps the artist was just using some artistic license, but in any case, it's identified with, perhaps inspired by, the narrative of Ulysses and the hostile Laestrygonians. And along with those questions as to the plot, you can also see here, again, a beautiful use of atmospheric perspective. If I zoom in a little on the sea and on the mountains, they're in a bay surrounded by a mountainous promontory. They're very realistic as far as Mediterranean geography. And you can see the mist, the fog, the clouds on the sea and in the mountains. So there is a beautiful use of atmospheric perspective to bring this landscape to life and to immerse us in it. You know, this is an immersive painting. We're being invited into the landscape. This is another view of the same scene under different lighting conditions. Here you see more of a sense of the blue of the waters, gray rocks. Again, notice the clouds in the sky. Something else that you'll notice here, which is important about Roman art, is that if you look on on any side of the painting, but it's especially evident on the right side of this painting, what do you see? You look at the right side of the screen.
You see a continuation of the scene.
Yes, yes. So we're looking at panels in a series. Again, this is episodic. You know, I liken this to techniques used in TV and movies today, and this is, in fact, episodic. You'll also notice that there's something that divides the two panels. What does that look like? So, and it's an illusion here. This is a trick on the part of our ancient Roman artist.
A painted pilaster.
Exactly, yes, a painted pilaster. Very good, pilaster, not column, since it's not load bearing. So the painters of ancient Rome loved to use elements of architecture. Roman architecture, as we will see, was spectacular. Rome in the era of the Republic and the early empire through the peak was an age of tremendous architectural achievements. It's an age where engineering was greatly valued, and naturally engineering and architecture go hand in hand. So there is the use of architectural inspiration even in painting, a whole different art form. So that tells us something about the importance of architecture to the Romans. And it also tells us, as far as how this painted pilaster is being used here, it also tells us that the Romans had the idea of the frame or the framing device. You know, it's not that they were literally framing, putting a picture in a frame the way we do today, but they did use the framing device. Sometimes they chose not to use the framing device, but even when they did that, its absence is deliberate. They know what a framing device is. They think in terms of pictures being in frames or not being in frames, just as we do. So that's also worth noting. The framing device, like the painting within a painting, is of great philosophical interest in art history. Rene Magritte in the 20th century said, "A painting without a frame is not a painting." Magritte, the Belgian surrealist, was rather existential. His point was, well, if there's no frame, where does the painting end and reality begin? Or vice versa. Just as we often talk about life imitating art and art imitating life. So these philosophical questions go back to the classical world and the artists of ancient Rome. And that is probably a good place to pause for our intermission. So when we come back, we'll transition from painted ships to looking at some models of some real ones. And we'll take more of a look at Roman transportation and what that meant to the Republic and eventually the Empire. So we will pick up in about 5 minutes.
Okay, Chris, thank you. I must resume my travels, so I will get this on the recording. I'll see you
Okay.
on Monday. Thanks.
Thank
very,
you,
very much.
Tom.
Nice to be here again.
Happy travels.
Take care. Bye-bye.
It's based. Very good. It's based partly on paintings like this, partly on literary descriptions, and also, of course, archaeological finds that we have these reconstructions of some of the ships used in ancient Roman times. Our focus for this course is the city of Rome itself, but transportation was the lifeblood of the Republic and then the Empire. The Romans even called the Mediterranean Mare Nostrum, RC, RC. Imagine calling the Mediterranean RC. It's like that was their water feature. In the Roman development, the Mediterranean was considered their water feature. So the transportation, not only of the Roman armies, but transportation for trade, for commerce, for the merchants, ships, and of course the Roman roads, which we'll be looking at further, were essential. Also, as the city of Rome itself gets bigger and bigger, they ended up with the same problem that big cities today have. A city, a big city anyway, cannot possibly feed itself. So food had to be brought into Rome from all over as the population of the city continued to expand and Rome became more and more of an ancient metropolis. So that leads us to the historic center of the city, the Roman Forum. Now, when we go to see the Roman Forum today, it's singular, it's the Roman Forum, and forum itself is a singular term. In Latin, the plural would be fora. In the ancient city, there were fora. There was not just a single forum the way we think of it today. Different emperors would build their own fora. You have various fora from different periods, but because some of them were in this area, the ruins are collectively known as the Roman Forum. The idea of a forum or fora as a center of the city was very important to the Romans. With Rome itself, again, as it gets to be more and more of a metropolis, you have these multiple fora. A smaller city or a village would have a forum. With the Forum of Rome today, as I said, we're looking at buildings from all different eras within Roman history, but there is so much to explore. This is an interesting site. A part of the forum called the rostra, that is the speaker's platform. Now that is mostly in ruins. You can see nearby the colonnade of one of the earliest surviving temples, or well, surviving at least in a fragmentary way, the Temple of Saturn. So you can see the colonnade of that temple is standing. And if you would imagine the rostra, the speaker's platform of the forum, as it would have been, here's a reconstruction of this area. The rostra, and we have the word rostrum today, the speaker's platform, along with the Temple of Saturn. The Temple of Vespasian would have been later on. That's from the imperial era. But you can also notice in this reconstruction something intriguing and kind of mysterious on the side of the rostrum. Notice there are, I guess to our eyes, maybe it looks like abstract sculptures jutting out from the platform. Well, we've already talked about how Roman art is all about realism. So they're not going to have abstract art. What you're actually looking at here are the prows of ships. The prows, go back to the reconstructions of the ships. As a trophy of war, the prow of a defeated enemy ship would be brought back to Rome and placed on the rostrum. So what you have on the front of the rostrum are all of these prows of enemy ships defeated in Mediterranean battles.
Oh, okay.
This is another view of the colonnade of the Temple of Saturn, and it shows you something, well, it's a nice forum scene for one thing. It gives you, the atmosphere of the ruins of the forum. It also shows you the Greek influence on Roman architecture. This idea of the colonnade definitely is an example of that. As we continue to look at Roman architecture, we'll see how it's actually a very dynamic fusion of Greek influence, Etruscan influence, and very new and original Roman elements. Now, if we were to peek under the Temple of Saturn, we would find this cavernous looking area, and that was a treasury. The idea of a treasury being part of a temple was very widespread in the ancient world. You see this with the Parthenon too. The Parthenon in Athens has a treasury. Why was this such a safe place to keep gold and treasure? Why would a temple be like an ancient bank in terms of safekeeping and security?
Well, I'll take a guess. It would be a sacred place.
Yes, who wants to rob a temple? I mean, think about Greek and Roman mythology. All of the transformations and the nasty things that the Olympian gods and goddesses would do to mortals for far less offense than that.
That's
So yeah, so they're going to think, wow, imagine if I rob the temple, who knows what kind of insect or animal the gods are going to turn me into. So this was a very effective deterrent to crime. And then if you have somebody who was a skeptic, and there were plenty of skeptics in the classical world, they're still going to be concerned about the reaction of people, the social approbation of being known as someone who was a robber of a temple. That was certainly, a highly disreputable and shameful crime in the ancient world. So there was that aspect as well.
right. So they would be defiling the temple, is what you're saying.
Exactly, yes. It would be seen by the Romans and the Greeks as a blasphemous act. So thus, you have in the ancient world the development of an association between temples and banks. In fact, arguably the first banks are in temples. this is the ruins of a basilica in the Forum. Now, this is quite ruined, so to appreciate it, we do need a bit of a reconstruction here. And the Basilica Aemilia, I wanted to include because the basilica form is something that is important in architecture. And as we get to medieval and Renaissance Rome, we're going to see how this idea of the basilica takes a different turn. The basilica in ancient Rome, with this as an example, the Basilica Aemilia, it's a courtroom. It's a hall of justice. And, you know, the geometry and the stateliness of Roman architecture does lend itself very well to that, along with the traditions of Roman law and the importance of Roman law. You know, that's why you often see courtrooms today are in the classical style. After all, in terms of the importance of Roman law, innocent until proven guilty is a Roman adage. Just to give a very familiar example of the value and influence of Roman law, innocent until proven guilty. That was an adage of ancient Roman law. So the basilica was a courtroom, a hall of justice. But then when we get to the Middle Ages, we see the form of the basilica, this largely rectilinear, rectangular form, being adapted to church architecture. So the typical design of church architecture in Western Europe stems from the Roman basilica, a rectilinear form where there is, well, in the case of a church, that is used to set up an entryway on one side and then an altar at the other side. So the rectilinear form lends itself to that. So that was an adaptation of the design of Roman halls of justice into a different purpose, a church. And the word even changed its meaning in that respect, so that the Roman term basilica, the term itself, has come to refer to a church of that design. This is an interesting spot and an interesting idea. If you look at the Latin name here, what surprising English cognate might you see?
Umbilical cord.
Exactly, yes. This was seen as the center of the world by the Romans. The Roman Forum or Fora, and perhaps this particular spot. It was associated with the founding of Rome. It was seen as being, according to the ancients, the oldest, among the oldest parts of the city. So this was a spot that in classical times was associated with the founding of Rome. Now today, you know, and this goes along great with our title, the Eternal City. Today, you know, there's so much of Rome that is ancient. We could never look back now and even take an educated guess as to the oldest spot in Rome. But this has that legend associated with it, at least, that in ancient times, this was believed to be among the oldest places in Rome, and it was associated with the foundation of the city itself, and thus the idea of a Roman umbilical cord. This is a related concept, in a way, the golden milestone. So think about the proverb, all roads lead to Rome. It's very true in the ancient world. We'll be looking at the construction of Roman roads next, and the roads were essential to Roman civilization. Well, there's another part to that expression, all roads lead to Rome. It goes on from there. all roads lead to Rome, and there the highways end. That's the uncut version. So this is where the highways end or begin. They both begin and end here, depending on how you look at it. It's called the Golden Milestone. And it was, for the Romans, mile marker 0. There were milestones along the Roman roads. That's where our word milestone comes from. So where you have milestones, you also have a mile marker 0. And that was in the Roman Forum, the Golden Milestone, where the Roman system of roads was perceived as both beginning and ending. So this is the possible location of that. And you can see the Latin phrase there, Malarium Aureum. This is the Great Appian Way, one of the surviving Roman roads, more than 2,000 years old, actually about 2,500 years old, named for a wealthy Roman citizen who spearheaded its construction. And I think this is a beautiful photo that conveys something of the Roman countryside as well. This gives you a look at the construction of the Appian Way and the other great Roman roads. What do you make of this as you look at this kind of cutaway scene, a reconstruction of construction here? But what do you make of this in terms of why the Roman roads were so good and why they've lasted so long?
They appear to be very substantial with several layers of material that would endure.
Yes, exactly, Julie. This is layer upon layer. They were designed to endure. They're not like the roads today that are designed to last about 6 months. They were designed to last through the centuries, and they have. When you look at the Appian Way, even today, what you're seeing even now is the surface. Look at, in the reconstruction, the cobblestones that they're laying down as the top surface. That's still there. Even that is not worn away. So this is just an amazing testament to Roman engineering and construction. And this is the result. This is the Roman world with the network of roads, as well as this map also has some of the key shipping routes suggested. Now, I mentioned how Roman architecture is a fusion. This is a temple from the era of the Republic that really gives you some insight into that. When we looked at the Temple of Saturn, well, all that's left is a colonnade. So, that could easily be Greek. But here you have a better look at the fusion that's involved. How is the Temple of Portunus that you're looking at here, how is this different from a Greek temple? There are some resemblances if you look at the front, but how is it different than the Parthenon?
It's not equal on all sides.
Exactly. The Greeks love symmetry. That's part of their idea of harmony. The Romans love variety. By comparison to Roman architecture, Greek architecture looks OCD because the Greeks have this love of symmetry and such a passion for it. Roman architecture, on the other hand, is expressive of variety. So here, they're not trying to have everything be equal and symmetrical. Instead, they're taking some Greek elements, but then clearly fusing that with other influences as well, because this is not symmetrical. It's very easy to tell which is the front, which is the entrance, and which is the back. With a Greek temple, you can't tell because it's designed to be so symmetrical. It's designed as, for the Greeks, an expression of harmony. So you have to get pretty close to a Greek temple to figure out which would be the entrance and which would be the other side. It's not designed to tell you that. It's designed to be an expression of symmetry and thus philosophical harmony in Greek culture. Whereas the Romans are interested in taking an idea and playing with it, having geometric variety architecturally. So the other influence here for the Temple of Portunus is Etruscan architecture, going back to the importance of Tuscany and the Etruscans. Etruscan temples were not symmetrical. You could tell which was the front and which was the back, and that's the case here. So there is an Etruscan element in play here too. Now, interestingly, the Etruscan, I'm going to zoom in on the back part of this temple, because this is where it becomes a literal fusion, in fact. When you look at the back portion of the Temple of Portunus, you see pilasters set into the wall. Now, an Etruscan temple is not going to have columns or pilasters in back. They will have the colonnade in front, but then they just have walls in the back. A Greek temple, of course, will have the colonnades all the way around, peristyle architecture. The Romans have literally, in this case, fused those two ideas. Pilasters in a wall for the back of the temple. So it's literally a combination of Greek and Etruscan styles here. And as such, it's a good example of how each of these civilizations, Greek and Etruscan, was important to Roman civilization. The influence of Greek civilization and Etruscan civilization are essential in Roman history. And this is what an Etruscan temple would have looked like. So you see the colonnade, but then on the sides and back, it's simply walls. You don't have those pilasters or columns in antis, is a related term for the sides and back of the temple. Portunus, by the way, was a very local deity for the port area of the Tiber River. So this is a good example of the nature of Roman religion, where there's a god or goddess for everything. One writer joked about the god of the municipal water supply. That's only a slight exaggeration. And this is, of course, the other side of the coin in terms of Greek influence. So you can, with the Temple of Portunus, you're essentially combining an Etruscan temple and a Greek temple. As we go on, we'll look at some of the innovative Roman concepts. But with the Temple of Portunus, basically, if you imagine if you imagine these two temples colliding somehow, what results is the Temple of Portunus. Now, this is a more distinctly Roman style in the sense of being original to Rome, as opposed to combining other styles. A circular plan, the Temple of Hercules Victor, a circular or centrally planned structure. So there is a colonnade, but it's a circular colonnade around a circular building. That is distinctively Roman. You also see it in the famous Temple of the Vestal Virgins. So this is an innovation in Roman architecture, and it's a good example of how they like the geometric variety in their architectural designs. When we were talking about Cato earlier, I mentioned his expression, Carthage must be destroyed. Well, in the earlier wars against Carthage, the famous Roman commander had been named Scipio. And this is his tomb. So Scipio and his family, he was essential in the Roman defeat of the Carthaginians when they were struggling for supremacy in the Mediterranean. It's interesting that the Scipio family tomb has survived. It's also interesting in this idea of a family mausoleum. This is still, very much the case in Italy today. I mentioned my great-grandparents being from the village of Callitre. When I went back to Callitre and met some of my grandmother's cousins, they actually showed us the current family mausoleum. It's an idea that goes back, as you see here, to ancient Roman times. The Circus Maximus brings us to the excitement of Roman chariot racing. The Circus Maximus, as you can see here, 650 feet wide and almost 2,000 feet long. Just imagine the chariots racing along this course. I have some reconstructions to help us imagine that. This great oval stadium. So this is what it would have looked like, very much a combination of a horse racing track and a football stadium today. There was a kind of island, long oval island in the center with architectural features, including obelisks as a nod to the fact that Egypt was coming under Roman domination. And this reconstruction even portrays a palm tree on that island in the middle. And then you have the long oval track around it where you would have the thundering chariots. Seen from Ben-Hur conveys this as well as anything can. And the death or glory aspect of charioteering that was conveyed in Ben-Hur was very accurate. This is it's like the Palio, in Siena today, the great horse race in Siena, the Palio, where it's no holds barred. And that was very much the case with Roman chariot racing. You had to not only guide this team of fiery horses down the track, you had to be on the lookout for missile weapons your competitors might be throwing at you during the race. Nothing if not exciting. This is a terracotta relief of a charioteer. So this gives us an interesting look, contemporary, at an artistic representation of chariot racing. And how do we know that he's victorious in this relief?
He's holding the.
Yes, he has the palm frond that you can see. He's literally borne away the palm. That's where the expression comes from. Borne away the palm for victory. The palm frond given to a victorious charioteer. And he also has a laurel crown I believe it is, in his hand. So he has the crown, the laurel crown, and the palm frond. He's described here as a green charioteer, quote unquote. That's based on the inscription. The charioteers were in teams that were named for colors. And each team had its enthusiastic fans, sometimes too enthusiastic. At times there would be brawls, even riots that would break out between the adherents of the greens versus the reds, and so on. And interestingly, that continued into the Byzantine Empire. In Constantinople, when they had chariot racing, they carried over the same idea of the teams with the color names, and they carried over the brawls as well. At one point, the palace of Constantinople almost was stormed following a brawl that broke out among fans of chariot racing. The brawl spread and became an uprising, and the palace was very nearly sacked as a result.
Chris, did they allow betting? Was that a big factor?
Oh, definitely. Yes. Mhm.
Definitely.
Yes. Yes. Good question, Julie. Yes. Betting on the charioteers, gambling, definitely a major aspect. This is a fun artifact, a glass beaker with a dolphin design. And it's believed that the dolphin theme here is not just about the beautiful sea creature that we know and love here in Vero, but also because they would have dolphin markers on the Circus Maximus as lap counters. So if I go back to the reconstruction of the Circus Maximus, the races are multiple laps, so there are signals that count when each chariot has gone around and how many times each chariot has gone around. And those signals were in the shape of dolphins. So it's thought that the dolphins on this glass beaker are based on those signals, which makes sense because look at the curve in this dolphin here. It's clearly not a real dolphin, but it looks more like a dolphin-shaped banner that's fluttering in the wind. So that's why it's thought that this is based on the lap counters in the Circus Maximus. And there's such a nice effect to the flowing lines on the glass. So I'll give you a few scenes from the port of Ostia. As I mentioned, this was an important part of, I guess you could call it the greater metropolitan area of ancient Rome, since the port of Ostia was essential in moving goods to and from Rome. The large map shows you the relationship geographically between Rome and Ostia. And then I'll minimize us for a minute. And then the smaller maps on the right, and the top one is showing you the city area of Ostia. The bottom one shows you some of the later ports. So Porto de Claudio, Porto de Trajano, they're named after Claudius and Trajan. They're each emperors. So that's from the imperial age, obviously. But it shows you how Ostia continued to be important and how some of the emperors expanded and fortified the port. This is an archaeological map, really, of ancient Ostia. And this is a photo of the ruins there. Again, very atmospheric place. when you think about a port city, what do you need? You need a lot of storage space. You need warehouses. So these are warehouses along the Tiber, near the mouth of the Tiber, where the merchants of Ostia would be shipping goods to and from Rome itself. And you can see here the functionality along with the continued interest and even imagination of Roman architecture. This is a merchant's warehouse. It has to be functional by definition. It's practical architecture, but it also has its own interest. You look at the use of the principle of the arch. Look at the interlocking brickwork here, how all of this adds to the stability of these large buildings. The engineering here is of interest in itself. This is a relief showing a ship in Ostia. Well, it's a relief from Ostia, and it shows a ship's cargo being unloaded. So this gives us a great look at the ancient Roman port of Ostia, the sculptural relief of cargo being unloaded from a ship. And can you see what they're carrying here?
Wine.
Yes, these are amphorae of wine, maybe olive oil. In fact, I have another visual aid that I can show you. This is basically a miniature amphora. This is from Calitri, and it's essentially a miniature Roman amphora. It's not of that antiquity, but it is of that design. Now, here we see more dangerous cargo. These sailors have to contend with a cargo of lions, and they're wishing they got to be on the ship with the cargo of wine instead. The lions, of course, are being brought back for the Colosseum. We will see more of that as the course continues. This is another great look at Roman engineering, as well as the port city of Ostia, because in this sculptural relief, and I'll minimize us again, we can see ships coming into the port, we see a lighthouse, and then on the other side, we see a tavern in the port. So here we have Roman engineering with the lighthouse. We have the port city. They are sailing into the harbor toward the lighthouse. And then they've made it to shore, so they get to go to the tavern and enjoy some of the wine that maybe they were shipping there. So we have an interesting tavern scene on the right-hand side, complete with a tavern dog. Can you see the dog jumping up, looking for something?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so from the sculptural reliefs, we can see some of the vast architecture of the theater of Ostia. This is indeed a classical theater design, the use of acoustics and line of sight. It would be spectacular. A stone amphitheater with this kind of an angle. Everybody is going to be able to both see and hear. And this also gives you a look at the continuing classical tradition of theater. And that's very much Greco-Roman. It's an aspect that goes back to Greek civilization and then is enthusiastically continued by the Romans. Now, I also promised you some distinctively Roman architecture, and this definitely is in that category. With the temple complex of Fortuna Primigenia, and this is a scale model of what it would have looked like. Here we are looking at the innovations of Roman architecture. If you look at the back of this scale model, what do you see behind the buildings? It gives you a sense of the landscape where this architecture was.
A mountain.
Yes, yeah. This is built on the side of a mountain, and it's built all the way up the side of a mountain. This is landscape architecture on a monumental scale, as well as architecture itself. It's landscape architecture on a monumental scale. They're transforming the side of a mountain into this very intricate, varied, and flamboyant complex. So if I go back to, well, let's stay here. When you look at the front of the scale model, you see kind of a triangular shape, very much like a temple pediment. But it's not a pediment, it's kind of an entryway. So when we go through that area, then we climb up the stairs. Notice there are stairs in the middle, and those stairs take us up through the buildings and up the mountain. We see that we are passing colonnades. We are also passing these half circular areas. I'll zoom in a little. We're passing also a number of these half circular areas inset into the buildings. Those are called exedra. You will also see them sometimes on their own in Roman gardens. A marble half circle wall and a bench. They're places to sit and rest in Roman gardens, places to converse. Here they're used as part of the architectural complex. We keep climbing up the stairs, we get to another colonnade, and then at the very top, this you can see better on the other plan, at the very top, you have an amphitheater. So we go through these colonnades, we then go through a piazza, more stairs, an amphitheater, and then at the very top, a centrally planned building, a circular building like the Temple of Hercules that we saw in Rome. So this is an incredible combination of all different geometric shapes, different techniques in architecture. It's, the design for this could be like between 5 and 10 different buildings. And they've combined it into one monumental design. It's very intricate, it's imaginative, it has variety. It's Roman architecture on a mountainside. This is a look at some of what is left of it today. And when you think about this kind of monumental architecture, your building materials are going to be key, right? You want this to have its own kind of beauty, but you obviously cannot make this out of something delicate. So a key Roman invention in architecture and engineering was concrete. And that was used in a key way for this temple complex. So concrete and cement are ancient Roman inventions. Think about the versatility of this. You have a material which can be applied moist and pliable. And then when it dries, it hardens, it solidifies, it has strength. Concrete was a major invention for the Romans, and it gave them tremendous opportunities in their architecture. The era of the Republic comes to an end by the time of Caesar, arguably before. Caesar has some precursors in the role that he is famous for. We think of Julius Caesar as the man who seizes power and turns the republic into an empire. Actually, by the time he came around, a number of men had already tried that. Caesar was just more successful. There is a figure from the days of the early Roman Republic who was named Cincinnatus. And I mentioned, we were talking earlier about some of the connections with George Washington and early American history. When George Washington, at the end of the Revolutionary War, returns to Mount Vernon, and then again, when at the end of his second term as president, he establishes the tradition of 2 terms as the presidential limit, would eventually become constitutional, but Washington establishes the tradition, returns to Mount Vernon, happily retires. He was thinking of Cincinnatus. I mean, with his education and his interests, I can pretty much guarantee that. Cincinnatus was a Roman hero who had been called upon to lead the armies during a time of crisis. He got this message while he was on his farm at his plow. And then when he won, the crisis was over, he went back to his plow. And it became proverbial, Cincinnatus returning to the plow, having the self-control, the self-discipline to give up power, to avoid the corruption of power, and return happily to a simple life. Well, people like Cincinnatus are hard to find. So as Rome continued with the custom of, during a time of crisis, appointing someone, giving them wide but temporary powers, well, oftentimes they would not want to relinquish those powers even after the apparent crisis had passed. So you have people being temporarily given powers and then refusing to give those powers up. This eventually was what endangered and then brought down the Roman Republic. And it's not coincidental that the expression they would use for giving people these temporary powers was dictator, appointing a dictator. Well, today that's a contradiction in terms. You don't appoint a dictator, they just show up and refuse to leave. But in Roman times, initially, this was a term that was referring to an appointment. But then, as they refused to give up the reins of power, it took on the modern meaning. So there were a number of these men. One of them was named Sulla the Happy. He was given the nickname the Happy because he claimed that no friend had ever done him a favor and no enemy had ever done him a wrong without being repaid in full. It's a curious definition of happiness, that was how Sulla defined happiness. So he was one, Pompey was another. Eventually, Julius Caesar comes along as the most cunning of them all. And of course, historically the most important. So this is a portrait of Julius Caesar that may date from his lifetime, or at least not long afterwards, known today as the Caramonte portrait. So here we have these traditions, they're already traditions of Roman portraiture, realism in Roman portraiture, being applied now to someone we all know as one of the most famous people in history. So what do you make of this? What do you make of the characterization here in this portrait of Julius Caesar? I'll zoom in on his face. course, you see his famous haircut there. You have that sense of determination, I think, that we saw with the earlier Stoic portraits. Caesar certainly is still a very Stoic figure, even though he's ending the Republic rather than continuing it, but he is undoubtedly a Stoic personality. One of my favorite story about Julius Caesar is when he was kidnapped by pirates as a young man. He was a Rhodes scholar. That in the day meant you literally traveled to Rhodes in the Eastern Mediterranean, great center of learning. On his voyage, Caesar was captured by pirates. They were going to send a ransom demand back to his family. And Caesar talked them into increasing the price of the ransom. He took a look at the letter and said, well, that's insulting. I'm worth far more than that. He talks them into increasing the price. The ransom is paid. They send him free. He raises an army, comes back, battles the pirates, defeats them, kills them, takes over their lair, and gets the family gold back. That was young Julius Caesar. The Mediterranean world should have been taking notice of him at that point. So you have, as you look at the tight line of the lips, there's that sense of self-discipline, but also the struggle involved in maintaining that. After all, Caesar is Stoic as a warrior, and he's Stoic in the face of danger, but he's no Cincinnatus. He does totally, throw himself into the allure of power. So there's, I think, a complexity to this portrait that aptly conveys the complexity of the man. It's also worth noting how you can see the lines of his forehead and on his face, but not to the degree that we saw with the earlier Stoic portraits. And that may be partly because Caesar is assassinated. He doesn't live to be an elderly man. He's, he's starting to get on in years, but he's by no means elderly. But it also may be there's a shift in terms of Caesar as a conqueror wanting to look, he wants to look experienced, but he doesn't want to look as old as the Roman patricians in the earlier portraits. He wants to look like he's still a warrior. And that is likely conveyed in the different sense of age that we have with this portrait. This is a portrait of a man who is experienced, but also can still wield a sword and charge into battle. And that's very much the way Caesar would have wanted to be portrayed. And this is where he was assassinated. Largo, Argentina, it's called today. This is the spot in Rome where Caesar was assassinated. He was leaving the Senate after having given them a speech, but because the Senate House was under some refurbishment at the time, they were not meeting in their usual location. So this is where that famous assassination of the classical world actually took place. And Caesar's last words, as given by Shakespeare, Et tu, Brute, when he saw that one of the few men he trusted, Brutus, was among the conspirators and the assassins. Some Roman historians give the words, they use a quote that's even more plaintive than Shakespeare's version. Some Roman historians say that his last words were, "And you, lad," referring to Brutus, "and you, lad." It is a curious end to such a complex character, someone who in some ways was stoic, who was certainly ruthless, and yet who was capable of being surprised and dismayed by this betrayal. certainly one of the most dramatic scenes of ancient history, and one which sent reverberations throughout Rome and the Roman world, as we will see next time. We're ending on a cliffhanger here, a good dramatic note. I think the Roman epic writers would have approved. Any questions before we close for today? Okay, well, thank you all. I will see you next time as we begin the
you.
Imperial Age.
Yes, thank you. Very good.
Yeah.
Thanks, Michael. Thank you.
Chris?